For a 7-year-old male, 7, not breathing, sounds like they're getting CPR started.
For a 7-year-old male, 7 not breathing. Sounds like they're getting CPR started. That's the dispatch call from the morning of November 4, 2025 in Flint Township, Michigan. 7 words for a 7-year-old male, 7 not breathing. The kind of radio run that first responders carry with them for the rest of their careers, not because of what they saw, but because of the number that waited for them on the other side of the door. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files 911. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Now, imagine the medical examiner's scale. Not a bathroom scale, not a digital readout. The industrial platform scale with the sliding counterweight, the one they use when a body comes in and the manner of death is still a question mark. Picture the counterweight on the long steel beam. It's resting at 255. The pathologist's hand is frozen above it, because in a career of measuring what human neglect can do to a human body, they have never had to slide that weight that far for a child who hadn't yet seen his 8th birthday. That single image, the scale, the number, the pause, does more work than any headline ever could. It tells you this is not a story about a difficult child or a family that fell through the cracks. This is a crime scene measured in pounds. The boy on that scale was Casper O'Brien, 7 years old, 4 feet 2 inches tall, diagnosed with autism and nonverbal. His obituary called him a bright, loving young boy whose joyful spirit touched everyone around him. It listed his survivors, his parents, Jessica and Damian. By the time that obituary was written, Casper had been dead less than a day. By the time the police finished their first walkthrough of the home, the parents who were supposed to be the chief mourners were already the primary suspects. On June 23, 2026, 7 months after that 911 call, both were arrested and charged with second-degree murder, torture, and 3 counts of second-degree child abuse. One of those child abuse charges is for Casper's 5-year-old sister, found alive in the same house. The 16-page police report from the Flint Township Police Department reads less like a narrative and more like a document that the officers themselves struggled to write. 5 different officers submitted statements, and in almost every one, you can sense them reaching for clinical language and finding it utterly insufficient. One officer wrote, "The residence was absolutely disgusting and can't be accurately described in words." Another tried anyway. Upon entering through the front door, I observed the living room completely covered in trash, including numerous stacked garbage bags. The summary paragraph in the report states, "The residence was overwhelmingly cluttered and unsanitary with large amounts of trash and poop throughout which emitted an overbearing and foul odor. Furthermore, there were abundant insects throughout the entirety of the residence." That's the official record, but it's the small detail buried in one officer's narrative that does the heavy lifting. He wrote that the floor was so covered with debris, I could not tell if there was carpet or wood floors. Think about that for a moment. A trained police officer, walking upright through a room, could not identify the surface he was standing on. That is not clutter. That is obliteration. Paramedics had already rushed Casper to the hospital when the first officers arrived. The boy's uncle had been performing CPR in the chaos of the living room. At the hospital, Casper was pronounced dead just before noon. The local medical examiner would later determine the cause of death as dilated cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the heart muscle weakens and stretches until it can no longer pump blood effectively. The National Institutes of Health classifies it as a disease strongly associated with extreme obesity. In plain terms, Casper's heart had been working against a weight it was never designed to carry, and on November 4th, it simply ran out of strength. The investigation that followed peeled back layer after layer of information that made the condition of the house look almost like a sideshow. What the parents told detectives became the centerpiece of a case that Michigan prosecutors now say amounts to murder. When detectives spoke with Jessica O'Brien, she described her son's daily life. She said Casper was mobile, he could move around, but then clarified that he spent approximately 12 hours a day in his bed. He was, for all practical purposes, bedridden. His diet, according to his mother, consisted of a large bag of potato chips each day, a large French fry, carbonated sugar water, and apple juice. She said he had an undiagnosed eating disorder and that all he wanted to do was eat. Remember, this is a 7-year-old who could not speak. He could not tell you if he was hungry or if he was hurting. He could only receive what was put in front of him. Casper had not seen a doctor in 2 years. 2 years. Let that number sit for a moment. The average weight for a 7-year-old boy is between 50 and 55 pounds. When Casper was 5, the last time a physician laid hands on him, he would have already been large. But in the 2 years that followed, with no medical oversight whatsoever, he gained nearly 200 pounds. That kind of weight gain, in that compressed a time frame, does not happen by accident. It does not happen because of an undiagnosed eating disorder in a non-verbal child who cannot independently obtain food. It happens because someone is providing the calories, consistently, repeatedly, and in quantities that exceed what many adults would consume in a day. And here is where the documentary record from the police interviews pivots from tragedy to a kind of controlled fury. Because while Casper had not seen a pediatrician in 2 years, his parents had been to the doctor plenty. Jessica O'Brien told investigators that she and Damian went to the doctor regularly. Her most recent appointment had been 1 month before her son died. She also stated that Damian's job in IT came with solid health benefits, and the co-pay for a doctor's visit was just $20. $20. Casper had open sores deep in his skin folds, rashes that had progressed to infections with swelling and redness, and a body that had not been submerged in water for a bath in approximately 6 months. His father told police he cleaned him with wipes, maybe 3 times a week, because Casper didn't like water, even though the home had a working shower. The police examination at the hospital described the boy's hair as extremely dirty and began to dreadlock in several areas, his fingernails as very long, unkempt, and filthy in the areas under the skin folds and armpits. One officer wrote, observed redness and open sores that appeared to be infected. Upon removing the boy's soiled disposable brief, the officer documented deep red rashes with open sores to both of the backside of his legs, thighs, and buttock that also appear infected. The same officer summarized what he saw as some of the worst open sores and rashes I have ever personally witnessed. And none of that, not one of those conditions, not the weight, not the immobility, not the smell of infection that the officers noted even after death, was ever brought to a doctor. Because a doctor's visit cost $20, and that was apparently too high a price. But it wasn't too high a price for Jessica's own appointments. It wasn't too high a price for managing the parents' diabetes. They both received prescription medication for their own conditions. The household finances, by Jessica's own admission, were stable. Money was not the barrier. The barrier was something else entirely. There's a detail in the police report that lands like a punch. On the morning Casper died, Jessica told officers that one of the family dogs had suffered a stroke the night before. Her first action upon waking up was to prepare to call the veterinarian. She was actively seeking medical care for an animal on the same day her son stopped breathing. When a detective later asked why she hadn't taken her non-verbal, autistic, morbidly obese son to a doctor in 2 years, she gave a cascade of reasons. She didn't like waiting in a waiting room for a long time, only to have a doctor spend 5 minutes telling her the child was fine. She said she had a general distrust of doctors because she claimed to have been sexually assaulted by one in the past. But as the police noted, that distrust did not stop her from seeing her own physician a month earlier. Inconvenience and personal history are the two shields she held up. Neither one explains how a 7-year-old reached 255 pounds under her roof. Damian O'Brien, for his part, told police he thought his son weighed around 170 pounds. Even if that number were true, and 170 pounds at age 7 is still a medical emergency. The discrepancy between what a parent perceives and what the scale actually reads tells its own story. You don't miss 85 pounds on a child you live with unless you've stopped looking at him as a person whose body is sending you a distress signal every single day. Here's the thriller buried inside this tragedy. For 2 years, that house had a countdown running, not in days or months, but in pounds. Every bag of chips, every skipped bath, every decision to stay on the couch instead of sitting in a waiting room for $20 added another tick to a clock that only the parents could see. Casper couldn't call out. He couldn't walk out the front door. He couldn't tell a teacher because he never went to school. He was entirely contained within the walls of that home, while the timer moved towards 0. And when it hit 0, it wasn't a loud explosion that the neighbors could hear. It was a 911 call at 8:45 in the morning from a mother who said her son had been breathing 30 minutes earlier and now wasn't. The question that turns this from a sad local story into something that should rearrange how we think about culpability is this: if a child gains 100 pounds in 2 years under total adult control, and no one calls the police until he stops breathing, is the crime only what happened on the last day, or is it every single day that came before? On June 23, 2026, the answer came from the Genesee County Prosecutor's office. Murder. When police arrested Damian O'Brien, he declined to speak and asked for a lawyer. Jessica, however, talked. In a recorded interrogation, detectives showed her photographs of her son's body. Her responses, as detailed in the report, are a study in deflection. She initially claimed the open sores on Casper's backside had been there only a couple of days. Then, when confronted with the obvious medical impossibility of that timeline, she revised it to a month. She told detectives she had no idea the rashes were even present. The same rashes that one officer described as the worst he'd ever seen. When asked why she didn't wipe Casper more thoroughly, she said he didn't like being wiped, so she only wiped his body quickly, and acknowledged wasn't as much wiping as she would have liked. And then the detective asked the question that cuts through every excuse like a scalpel. From the report, I then asked Jessica, did you ever think of how much pain Casper was in? Jessica replied, no, and I probably should have. I then asked, why do you say that? Jessica replied, just seeing this now, I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know it was that bad. I was so in my depression that it just... That sentence trails off in the transcript, but the legal implication does not. The charge of second-degree murder in Michigan does not require proof of intent to kill. It requires a showing that the defendant knowingly created a high risk of death or great bodily harm, and that they acted with a conscious disregard for that risk. The parents' own statements. that they had insurance, a $20 co-pay, a working shower, the ability to see their own doctors, the presence of mind to plan a vet visit. All of it paints a picture not of inability, but of choice. They chose convenience. They chose to let the non-verbal child stay in bed for half of every day. They chose to describe potato chips and sugar water as a diet and then act surprised when the scale broke past 200 and kept climbing. $20. The medical evidence sealed the leap from neglect to murder. The dilated cardiomyopathy was not a congenital defect that suddenly appeared. It was the physiological endpoint of a body that had been forced to sustain a mass more than 4 times what it should have been. Casper's body mass index at autopsy was 70.7. For context, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention classifies a normal BMI for a 7-year-old boy as approximately 16. A BMI over 30 in an adult is considered obese at 71.7. Casper's body was operating under a load that most adults never approach. The heart muscle had remodeled itself to compensate, stretched thinner and thinner, until it could no longer generate enough force to circulate blood. The sores and infections were not separate problems. They were the external evidence of a body that had stopped being cared for long before the heart gave out. There's a parallel narrative running underneath all of this, and it involves the 5-year-old sister. Police found her in the home that day. She was described as morbidly overweight and dirty, with tangled hair and a persistent cough. A second-degree child abuse charge related to her condition is now on the docket. That little girl is a living, breathing piece of evidence. Her existence inside that same environment, subject to the same patterns of neglect, means that whatever was happening in that house was not a crisis of one difficult child. It was a family system in which both children were being slowly consumed while the adults maintained their own health, their own appointments, their own medications. The uncle who lived in the home has not been charged. Whatever his level of awareness was, the prosecutor's office has drawn its line around the 2 people with the legal duty to act, and who, according to the evidence, the timeline of the investigation offers its own quiet indictment. Casper died on November 4, 2025. The arrest came on June 20, 2026, nearly 8 months later. That's not a delay born of inactivity. That's the kind of time it takes to build a murder case when the mechanism of death is not a knife or a gun, but a refrigerator, a bedroom, and a closed front door. Medical records had to be subpoenaed. Forensic analysis of the living conditions had to be cataloged. The older photographs on Jessica O'Brien's social media, showing a large boy in 2022 and 2023, still recognizably a child, not yet a case study, had to be measured against the autopsy photographs that will one day be shown to a jury. And every layer of evidence had to be cross-referenced against the parents' shifting stories, so that when the warrants were signed, the case didn't just allege that a child suffered, it alleged that the suffering was known, willful, and lethal. That brings us to the charge of torture. In Michigan, torture is defined as the intentional infliction of severe physical or mental pain or suffering. For that charge to stick alongside murder, prosecutors will have to convince a jury that the accumulation of untreated sores, the enforced immobility of bed confinement, and the grotesque expansion of a child's body beyond any medical precedent was not passive neglect, but active torment. The police report hints at this with its repeated notation that the parents had the resources to intervene and didn't. The retired detectives who've commented on this case have used a phrase that appears nowhere in the statute but everywhere in the logic of the charges wanton and willful. If feeding a non-verbal child into a state of heart failure isn't wanton, then the word has no meaning. If ignoring infected, open wounds that are visible to the naked eye isn't willful, then what is? $20. Before I close this out, I want to give you something to do beyond just absorbing the horror of it. On our channel, we don't do outrage for the sake of clicks. We follow the paper trail. The charging documents in People v. Jessica O'Brien and Damian O'Brien are public record in Genesee County. I'm going to ask you to go pull the felony complaint. We'll link the portal in the description. Look specifically at the narrative section where the officers describe the condition of Casper's body at the hospital. Read it, not a summary. The actual words of the men and women who stood over a 7-year-old on a gurney and wrote down what they saw. Then come back here to the comments and answer one question. At what exact sentence in that document do you believe neglect crossed the line into murder? Not what you feel, what the evidence tells you, because that's what a jury is going to have to decide, and I want to see if our audience can look at the same facts and reach the same conclusion the law demands. If this case moves you, share this video so that the record is seen. Like it so the algorithm knows this kind of investigative work matters. Subscribe and hit the bell on Crime Files 911, because the next time a headline like this breaks, you already know we'll be there before the cameras leave, with the documents in hand. Casper O'Brien's name deserves to be remembered for more than a number on a scale. He was 7. And that's the whole point.